The original PlayStation was a powerhouse of its day, a pioneer of 3D gaming and of many genres including horror, first-person shooters, 3D platformers, etc. Obviously it's nothing to write home about these days, but the PS1 was one of the most important gaming consoles of all time. It introduced gaming to the mainstream and made gaming the cool thing to do, and as such was the first console in history to sell over 100 million units. And while most of its games these days look like a pixelated turd being thrown at a washing machine, it still has many worthwhile plays. For me, the PS1 introduced me to the possibilities of what gaming can be, the capabilities of what full 3D meant. The PS1 is one of my favorite consoles of all time. It's easy to say that it made the biggest impact of any console I've ever used. I remember the first time plugging in that console and the first time turning it on and hearing that orgasmic startup sound. It was one of the most advanced, mind-blowing things in my life, as quaint as that may seem now with how dated it is, but the PS1 was indeed my life for a good few years. Since my early childhood, I've continued to collect PS1 games and have amassed a fairly large collection, and with such a special console to me, it's fitting that I talk about my favorite games more in depth. So whether you're just getting into the console and need somewhere to start, or just want to know my opinions on some of these games, here's my top 20 favorite PS1 games. Number 20. It was a toss-up for this one. I was getting to the upper end of my top 20 and started to find it hard to fit everything I wanted to on this list. In the end, it was a toss-up between this game and Nightmare Creatures, but I ended up giving it to this, Tekken 2. I'm not one for fighting games, which is why it's all the more impressive that I was able to get into this one. Not being a fan of arcadey fighting games like Street Fighter, because for games selling themselves on replicating fighting, they feel too, for the lack of a better term, video gamey, and I was pleased to have one with more viscerally realistic physics in Tekken, and one with more methodical mechanics. It feels much more real than most fighting games of the time, and as such feels better to play. A slower paced, more immersive, realistic experience with intricate controls and a good difficulty curve, a varied character roster, an amazing soundtrack, and more. I'm not one for fighting games, but this is definitely one I'd recommend to anyone regardless of what you're into. 19. Some games are easy to put into a specific genre, but others can be quite hard to nail down, as is the case with Medieval 2. A starkly charming game with a lovable though incoherent main character Sir Daniel Forsyth. Sorry, I meant Fortescue, not Forsyth. Apparently I'm just illiterate. The resurrected medieval knight, a great visual aesthetic that made the most out of their hardware, and is one of the first games with proper dual-stick camera controls and movement, making it play much more advanced than was standard, and it felt like a downscaled high-end PS2 game. But I still can't really nail down what this game was. Hack and slash, platformer, action adventure, but whatever it was a great, tightly controlled, mechanically satisfying, varied, and above all, charming experience about a medieval knight in Victorian London. It's one of those indescribable games that you have to see for yourself to understand. Granted, I've not played the first one, so whether or not that one's better remains to be seen, but for now, Medieval 2 is without a doubt one of my favorites, and Daniel is one of my favorite protagonists, possibly the most likable dead man I've ever seen. Touché. 18. Final Fantasy VII is not going to be on this list. Well, if I'm not putting it on the list, then why wasn't it in the runners-up video? To fuck with fanboys. Truth be told, I could never get into Final Fantasy VII because I found the main characters unlikable and the story impenetrable. And in a JRPG, that's 90% of the pie. What I did, however, like was the significantly superior sequel, Final Fantasy IX. Much more sympathetic, likable characters, and a great, and might I add, coherent plot. Granted, the gameplay's still nothing special, but the story's good, and in a JRPG, that's a significant portion of the grade. And that's exactly what Final Fantasy IX nails down. It's been a while since I played it, so I might be misremembering, and I've never played it all the way through, because you find 100 hours to sink into a game like this and we'll talk. But Final Fantasy IX was what I found Final Fantasy VII to be built up as. Not the end-all be-all JRPG, because believe me, that particular nugget will be coming up later, but rather just the most solidly built game in the series. So if we're talking about Final Fantasy games I like, it's 9, 12, and... Wow, I am not the target demographic. 17. Licensed games are usually shit. I know it, you know it, your friend Steve knows it. It's just a fact of life that games based off of movies are not going to be good because most of the time it's a low-budget work-for-hire project cynically existing only to capitalize on something kids will recognize and dumb parents will buy. A fact that Toy Story 2 Buzz Lightyear to the Rescue heartily told to go fuck itself. Yes, even a shit clock is right twice a day, and by some miracle, Toy Story 2's tie-in game was great. One of the best 3D platformers of its generation, they constructed a level-based collectathon around the plot of the movie, split up by scenes of the movie, that had fun, varied gameplay, a host of challenges that made great use of the mechanics, and kept things fresh and unique, utilizing gameplay constructed around the abilities that Buzz Lightyear might use if the character was real. It controlled well and was surprisingly inventive, colorful, and memorable. From the race, to climbing the air vents, to fighting your doppelganger, it was all memorable and fun. You spin, jump, climb, and shoot your way through many challenges set throughout the movie. It's simple but finds variety in its simplicity, and is a welcome entrant to any PS1 collection. Why can't we get more good tie-in games again? 16. Names count for a lot. I doubt Grand Theft Auto would have been half as successful if it were called the Murdering Hookers Variety Hour. Actually, that's debatable. Regardless, the advantage of having an already successful game be ported to your system is that you can call it whatever the fuck you want and people will buy it. So step right up, Doom Custom PlayStation Edition. One of the most uninspired names for a great game ever. It's Doom, and you can't go wrong with Doom. It's the quintessential first-person shooter packaged with Doom and Doom 2 with some new levels thrown in. It's fast-paced, frantic, exciting, yada yada yada. It's Doom and there's really nothing else that needs to be said. Though I do find it kinda cute that they advertise on the back of the box up to 30 FPS. How far we've come, eh lads? 15. This wouldn't be a list of somebody's favorite games without something really obscure, so introducing Typhoo Wrath of the Tiger. Hands up anybody who remembers this game? Nobody? Okay. I swear, it's like this game doesn't even exist. It's like an elaborate hallucination, or like it just appeared on my doorstep one day, because I've literally never heard anyone talk about it before beyond me, which is a shame because it really is a solid beat 'em up. It's sure as hell memorable. I hadn't played it for years leading up to this, but it was so memorable for its gameplay, visuals, and balls-to-the-wall action that I remembered it in painstaking detail for all that time, and years later, it's just as good as I remember it. It has everything you could want in a beat 'em up, a good list of combos, varied enemies, monotonous yet satisfying stimulating gameplay. It's a nice little gem, this one, and it's a shame it's as unknown as it is. Granted, the plot's uninspired and the chi attacks are as pointless as a deep-fried condom, but it plays well, feels great, looks pretty good, stays fresh, and is a lasting experience that is well built enough to not get tiresome throughout the campaign in spite of the seemingly surface-level repetition. There's much more to Typhoo Wrath of the Tiger than appears on the surface, and it's definitely memorable. So let's all remember Typhoo Wrath of the Tiger. So I don't have to be the only one anymore. 14. So, fair warning, I don't have any rules for this list. If I feel like something deserves to be on this list, it's on the list regardless. So you're gonna see quite a few games from a certain two franchises. So let's start off with Crash Bandicoot. What seemed like a love letter to classic 2D platformers translated and put through the filter of 3D, beautiful in its simplicity, yet astounding in its variety it finds in its simplicity. It controls well with Crash himself feeling realistically weighty and the jumping mechanics being slick to a T. It looks amazing for the time, has a great progression in every aspect, music, difficulty, etc., and it has the creativity and passion to make every level feel utterly unique, fresh, varied, and endlessly fun from beginning to end. For more information, check out my review, shill. It may not be, spoilers, in my opinion, the best Crash Bandicoot game, contrary to the opinion of a very vocal minority of Crash Bandicoot fans, but it sure as fuck was an amazing place to start, and is a testament to the sheer talent and passion at Naughty Dog, that even back then they were able to make such a well-made advanced games that controlled perfectly, stimulated in every aspect, looked great, had an amazing soundtrack, and was just an overall fun, exciting, tense, rewarding game to play. Even back then, Naughty Dog were at the top of their class. Just nobody mentioned Way of the Warrior. 13. Now onto something a little bit more spoopy. I'm not the biggest fan of horror games because it's a thin line to walk between bored and too scared to continue for me because I'm a giant 6'1" pussy, but it's hard to deny the effect of Resident Evil. I have the director's cut specifically, and holy asshat, this game gets to me. The crippling controls, the superbly creepy sound design, the unpredictability, the tense combat, the conflicting save system, the varied and uniquely terrifying monsters, it all makes for one hell of a tense, terrifying experience. Granted, the terrible voice acting and campy as hell story breaks the tone somewhat, but I think it goes to make an 80s B horror movie feel like The Evil Dead. It's aged slightly poorly, the pre-rendered backgrounds and blocky character models look like crap, but it's an exercise in properly utilizing limitations like the tight claustrophobic level design, for example, keeping you on the edge of your seat, and always guessing what's around every corner, especially with the crippling tank controls, which is definitely a product of its era and wouldn't really work these days, but worked really well for this game. Resident Evil also created a genuinely intimate, memorable environment with the Spencer Mansion that sticks with you much more than games usually. In a few short hours, I remember Spencer Mansion more than the entirety of Los Santos and GTA 5. It's genuinely iconic, and even if you can't see the zombies, you can always hear them, which makes the game even more terrifying and unpredictable, not knowing what's around every corner. So it's this perfect storm of terror and intensity, and if you can look past all of the aspects that haven't aged well, it's a true survival horror experience. If you didn't have a poopy when the zombie dogs jumped through the window for the first time, you might be brain dead. You never know what horrors are lurking around every corner and what's going to pop out at you and when. It's unpredictable and genuinely terrifying.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Joseph!
That's it for this time. Check back next time for part 2.